I love the social. It's the academic stuff. What do you mean? It's too demanding. I can't do it. What do you mean you can't do it? Dude, you graduated valedictorian slips during your high school. Students said this, a lot of them to me. Well, yeah, but back then it was different. In a history class, they gave me a worksheet that was like a study guide. And all I had to do is like answer all the questions and memorize. I'm a good memorizer. And I just couldn't take the test. I was killing it. In science, the biology prof would like put everything up on an overhead. All I had to do was just like copy it down. They ain't overheads. I'm showing up at a biology class and chapter 3 was assigned and I'm supposed to walk in and all of a sudden she just starts talking. She's talking to me for an hour and I don't even know, like, dude, what do I even write down? Like, I got no clue what to write down. How do I know? Where's the overheads? Where's the handouts? Where are the study guides? I'm going home. One of them said, I'm in a history class, they make me read a novel a week. History. They're making me read novels in history. What is up with that? Are you kidding me? So, I mean, and then it just kind of snowballs from there. So, the obvious question we're dealing with now is, okay, you're sitting in a class and that math person's going on. You know, first you do this, then you do this, then you do this. The challenge for you, of course, is, while you're writing stuff down, your head is where? Looking down. The prof is going on and on at the board. When you look back up, prof's at a different phase in the problem, right? Now all of a sudden you're like looking around trying to figure out what's going on. Dude, what is, like, where, wait, where? And then the prof turns around and says, any questions? How are you supposed to ask a question other than, can you like do that all over again? Of course it doesn't matter. The prof can stand up here and do it 30 times all over again if you're doing this, right? Of course, what is it we say to young kids when we're trying to teach them how to dribble a basketball? Keep your head what? What do we always tell them? Right? Say the same thing in soccer. We're training kids to dribble a ball. Keep your head up. Don't look down, right? How are you going to keep your head up in a math class if you're writing everything down that's on the board? Well, that's what we're talking about now in class. 2 pieces of information. First of all, we call match information. Okay? Match information. Anything the instructor says that's also in the book. That is to say, anything the instructor says, you already wrote down over here and read it. Okay? So for example, if chapter 3's objectives for the biology textbook are listed right here in bullet point, ready for you, right? And all of a sudden the instructor starts talking about those objectives, guess what? There ain't no point in you writing that down. You already got it written down. What you're going to do is you just simply mark it some way. Circle it, underline it, star it. But you're working in a different color ink now. Instead of ready, now you're working in blue or black ink, because this is in-class work. Okay? So in other words, anything on the left-hand side of the line that's marked in blue or black ink is something that we call match information, what the instructor says that also is in the book. What are the odds it's going to end up on the exam if the instructor says it and it's also in the book? What are the odds it's going to end up on the exam? See how that works? Pretty high, right? I mean, if the instructor says it and it's also in the book, the likelihood of it ending up on the exam is something, what, like over 96%, right? The second thing you're looking for, this is huge, is stuff that ain't in the book. Stuff that ain't in the biology book. Profs are notorious for this. They will walk in and start lecturing. If you ain't read the book, you're assuming they're going through chapter 3 on photosynthesis. Way wrong answer. They're talking about the research that they recently either read or did themselves. And that's what they talk about. New information we're going to put on this right-hand side of the page, and that's why we like this line right down the middle of the page. Anything that goes on the right-hand side of the page is intel that either is not in the book or you didn't see it in the book. It might be there and you just missed it because you didn't read that close. Got me? Either way, that's information you did not put here. If the prof mentions it and it ain't in the book, there is a very high chance it's going to end up on the exam. My student that was working with her roommate realized after a conversation what really was happening and why she was struggling in her nursing program in biology. She wasn't really reading the book because she assumed the prof was telling her everything in chapter 3 photosynthesis. So she took really thorough notes. Notes. The only problem is that the prof was giving about 30% of her lecture as new information. Of course, the student didn't know it was new information because the student hadn't read the book. The student's assumption was that I remember better when I read right the night before the exam. So she was sitting down the night before the exam and reading chapter 3 to prep for the exam. Well, yeah, okay, so she was doing okay on the exam for anything that we would call match information from the book. But what about the other 30% of the garbage that was being said by the prof, not in the book? See? And of course, because she really didn't have a system to write it out, she wasn't sure what's match and what's new information. She was struggling on the exam. Okay? When you come to class then, you want to come having done this stuff, like for example, work the sample problems in the math class, so that when you show up, you do have questions. I don't understand in photosynthesis this part of that equation. Can you explain that to me? Or often the prof will explain it in the system of giving the lecture or whatever. Make sense? Okay. Finally, the third part has to do with exam prep. Makes sense, doesn't it? You're going to go back. You're not going to reread chapter 7 of your history text on the 3 causes of the American Civil War. That's asinine. What you are going to do is you're going to go back and you're going to study closely, right, your annotations. Now, if you've taken in-text annotations, and I would recommend that if you are taking another college class and you've got a textbook, try this system, internal annotation and external. See if it works for you, okay? In your freshman year, it's a learning curve, like any other skill set that you're going to develop, where you kind of get better at it as you go. Profs have different ways of lecturing, and you kind of start to figure that out early on. But the third part is the exam prep. I will put this in my notes. The first and most important question about exam prep is, what kind of exam? It is amazing to me how students will not ask this question in history. They will show up for a biology test. They don't even know what kind of test they're about to get. And see, different profs test different ways. There is a prof who lectures biology who will show up and say, take out 20 sheets of notebook paper. We're going to do our exam. You have the hour and a half to write. Answer simply this question. What would happen if photosynthesis does not happen? Ready, go. That's the final. So you're supposed to take everything from chapter 3, and now you get to put it all into an essay that you're going to write for an hour and a half. Answering the question, what would happen if there was no photosynthesis? Of course, the quick answer is nothing. It'd all go away, right? You ain't got photosynthesis. You got no oxygen. You got no life, right? Unfortunately, the prof's giving you an hour and a half to write this thing. 3 lines that say it would suck if there was no photosynthesis and we'd all be dead doesn't constitute an essay, right? You got to write for an hour and a half. Would you agree with me? That's a completely different approach to testing than a 250 closed book multiple choice test. Would you agree? I have students that say, dude, I would take the essay every day. I have other students that would say, screw the essay. I'm very interested in 250 questions because if I've done this right, those are easy for me. I can kick that stuff out all day long. And I can miss a few and still get an A. As opposed to an essay where once you go, you got to go. I mean, you better be able to say something impressive. And there's the whole thing of the form. What if I have mistakes? What if I can't spell really well? Because she's going to make me handwrite it to make sure that it's not plagiarized, downloaded from the net. And it's right there in class. I only have this time, and then at the end I'm done. Whatever I've said. Very difficult. You have to be able to prep for the kind of exam. Lots of profs don't tell you what the exam's going to look like. They just say there'll be an exam. So, first question, what kind of exam? Then, you want to prep for that exam in that way. If you know it's going to be a multiple choice test, for example, you want to try to construct multiple choice styled questions for yourself. Group study matters here. That research out of UCLA was huge. They went into the engineering department and they looked at the top students. Top students were Chinese that year. They're like, okay, we know we recruited these guys from China, and they're like really, really smart, did really well in testing and stuff, but why are they getting really good scores? Let's watch how they study. But we're also going to watch how the non-Chinese students study. The non-Chinese students go to the library, sit down at their little carrel, all by themselves, and they do hours and hours and hours of problem solving. Then they went to the Chinese who aren't in the library. Where are the Chinese? Well, they're all at the house where they live. They live off campus in a house. Walk in, and they're all sitting there on the floor in a big circle. There's food all over the place. Music's playing. It's loud. They're all talking, and there's papers everywhere. They're studying as a group. What are they doing? Making up the tests that they will be taking. They create questions, and then one of them throws the question out into the middle, and then they all have to solve it. They're getting the work of the normal student done in half the time, and they're getting to eat in the process. See? And so this research suggested studying in partners makes sense. Are you ready for this? Especially if you have a system. If everybody in your study group follows an annotative approach that's similar, you can get through a tremendous amount of information. Let's say, for example, that a biology prof does give a 200-question study guide. Instead of you sitting down and working through all of them, you take 10, your pal takes 10, another pal takes 10. See how that works? And then you come together, sit down, and everybody teaches everybody. Right? I have students that say one of the best things they ever got in their room was a whiteboard just like this that they pinned on the wall. And then they do their study groups where they get 3 or 4 students, and then each one gets up and like lectures on the whiteboard the way that the prof would for math, solving a problem. And while the guy's solving the problem, the other ones are talking. No, you did it wrong. You missed a step. Oh, yes. Right? So studying in groups is tremendously powerful if you have a study approach, an annotative approach. Questions, observations, concerns. I threw a lot at you just now. Let's finish now in composition, because what I just gave to you is a how to survive the academic community lecture. What's it got to do with writing? And I like that question. What's it got to do with writing? Think of it this way. I discovered there's a tribe in Africa I hear about. 2 things about them. The average height is 7'5". 7'5", average height of males in this village. And it's an undiscovered village. Nobody on the outside's discovered these cats. They've been living somewhere in a hole somewhere, and so nobody know about it. And I immediately think, dude, I'm going to make some serious bank in the NBA. I'm going to go over there, I'm going to teach some of these guys how to play basketball, and then I'm going to get them recruited to NBA teams and paid, and I'm going to get a little fee out of it. I'm going to make serious money. So I show up to teach them basketball. They have never heard of the game of basketball. Follow my example here. I hope it makes sense. Basketball, you say, I'm going to teach you basketball, you're going to make a lot of money, let me show you how this game is played. And you hand out worksheets to them about the rules of basketball. Okay? Then you build a court, dirt court in their village, and you set up the buckets, and you show them a ball. You throw them the ball, and the first thing they start doing is juggling it with their feet, trying to kick it into the goal. And you're like, no, this is not that game. That's a different game. This is the game of basketball. You do it with your hands. Oh, it's a goal kick. No, not that game either, right? They know soccer. They don't know basketball. This could go on for a long, long time before I'm going to create NBA players, right or wrong. But what if I took 10 of them, who I kind of could tell are pretty athletic? They're not too clumsy. And I put them on my Learjet and I fly them to Queens, New York. And for 3 months, all we do every day is go to the basketball courts, the hard court, asphalt courts. And I let them, first of all, just sit and watch. They just watch the game for a little bit. And then I say, go ahead, just try it. Get out there and just run with them and see what you can do. Are you understanding the difference? What am I saying? To really do well at skills, you have to look at models. If you look at good models, playing basketball on the hard courts at Queens, you're pretty soon, you're going to become a pretty good player, right? I always think of that great American soccer player from a few years ago named Kobe Jones, who said he thought he was a great player until he went to Brazil and he wanted to play, and they threw a tennis ball at him, little yellow tennis ball, and they said, when you can juggle this 1,000 times without it touching the floor, then you can play with us. You know, and he was really good at juggling a big ball, but he juggled a little tiny ball. Of course, little 10-year-olds could do it all day long. They humiliated him. This is a national team player of our national team. He said it was a great experience, though, because he got to look at models, right? I mean, all athletes know this. You look at people who do it well, and that's kind of how you learn to do it well. Question, how do you learn to write well? The answer, you got to look at models. You got to read models. Not read models. Remember, I had it up here on the board earlier. You got to read models, right? You got to learn how to look at them closely. And so part of a 10-10 course, granted, we are writing papers, no doubt, but a huge part of a 10-10 course is watching the game of basketball on the hard courts at Queens. And then going out and trying it. Make sense? Now, all of us know how to write, or you wouldn't be sitting in a 10-10 course in the first place, right? And I understand that our primary objective is to get 3 hours of credit. I get it. But I like to make a suggestion. You got to be here anyway, and it is your buck. Either that or somebody that, you know, sponsored you in some way, parent or a scholarship or whatever. So why not take the time and let's try to improve a little bit in the skill set development of writing. The way you get there is through reading. You cannot become a good writer unless you read. Okay? So I'm going to make a suggestion that we start to look a little bit closer at these chapters and more particularly the models. So now let's talk about next Thursday's submission and the way in which we'll be looking at these models and the annotations. Notice that I listed for you Chapter 3 notes. Remember, that's what I said, Chapter 3 notes. Now let's talk about what those notes actually will look like. 2 parts. 1. The first part is what we will simply call bullet pointing of information. So for example, if you're with me now for the Chapter 3 until starting on page 72, 73, all you're doing is just scanning this information and you're bullet pointing information, okay? Whatever it tells you, for example, on pages 74 and 75, you're just bullet pointing that stuff. Very, very simple. And I would say keep that kind of note-taking to a minimum. Very simple. Trust in your instincts to remember stuff, right? Because, for example, you know that I'm not going to ask you multiple choice style questions over each one of these chapters, at least in regards to the basic information about what constitutes a reflective essay or whatever, okay? But then on page 75, we move to another section of the chapter, don't we? And notice we have readings. We'll now change the term from readings to models, vis-a-vis my example that I just gave to you, right? Now here the models are. That is to say, here's the Queen's hardcourt players playing. Okay? Now think about this. Axelrod Cooper will have read literally tens of thousands of potential essays to draw the 4 that they're going to put in his chapter on reflections on a person or place. Okay? And they're going to give you then what they consider to be a powerful model. So we want to look at that model and pay close attention to why is this model a good model. Okay? Uh-oh, notice 76, 77. Do you see all that stuff in different colors? What do we call that? That's called annotation, huh? They've actually annotated in the book for you an example of what it looks like with internal annotation. Correct? In other words, they want you to understand the powerful approach that reading, notice in the margins, stuff in the margins, right? Now, in theory, if you owned this book, you would be doing this kind of note-taking in the margins as well. Okay? Now, what I want you to do is I want you to play a very similar kind of game this next week, for next Thursday, where you're looking at these models and you're reading them, and I want you to try to come up with some basic information about these models. Now, I would like to point out something real quickly. Just go to page 78. Do you see on the right-hand side of page 78, do you see it's number 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26? Do you see that? What is that? What are those numbers? They are, aren't they? Those are the paragraphs. Every one of the models will start with a number 1, and then we'll go to another number at the very end. And there is a certain number of paragraphs. We will begin to practice what we will call paragraph annotation. Now, you're going to do this a lot in the university, okay? Paragraph annotations, where all you'll do is just simply list 1, 2, all the way, okay? Then you're going to read. For each paragraph, you're going to write one and only one sentence where you're going to summarize that paragraph. Simple. Got me? So, for example, notice you have 27 paragraphs in this first model, right? That means you're only allowed 27 sentences, or not even full sentences. Okay? Our goal is to be very brief in our addressing the information in the paragraph. Okay? Now, later, we're going to begin to point out how, for example, paragraph 3 leads to paragraph 4, leads to paragraph 5, and so on and so on. Notice on page 79, same gig again. 1, 2, 3, 4, see how it works? All the way to 29. You got me? Okay. And all you're doing again, one sentence to try to explain what it is you're looking at. Questions? Drop, go.
So if we already did these notes, you want us to go back and do
Great question. So if you already kind of did these notes, it's very possible that you already kind of did this without maybe the numbering system. And so what I would say is just add the numbering system as you go. You know, just look back at your notes. So for example, look at, well, I'll just do it randomly. Page 82, paragraph 16, right? So for example, if you don't have anything that you said about paragraph 16, then just add it to the notes that you already took. I wouldn't say like redo, the work that you've already done. But what I would say, now that you've already done this once, and by the way, this is kind of a great question. And what does it tell me? What's it tell the instructor that she asked me this question? So this is code language to the instructor. What's it telling the instructor? She asked me this question. She's already what? Come on, guys, say it out loud. What's Strouk already done? To ask me this question, what's she already done? Right? She's read this, hasn't she? She's already taken notes over this information, right? That's classic. In other words, she did pre-class notes before she came in here, and now I'm adding to the expectations. She will then be able to decide, am I already doing this kind of paragraphing thing? I just didn't number it. Right. So, for example, Strouk might say, well, what I did is I just kind of combined, for example, 15, 16, 17, 18, and then I made one observation about all 3 or 4 paragraphs, right? See, and already we're moving in a direction where that's ultimately what we will do, where we'll be able to take multiple paragraphs and we do what we call in academic language, chunk them. In other words, we want to put them together, okay? Now, we'll do that for each one of the models, all right? So again, page 85. So in other words, when I come in next time, if I wanted to, I could ask you a question, for example, or I might say, okay, Ms. Hepp, we got a model on page 85 that starts. Using your notes, I want you to quickly summarize for the class what that model is about. Ready, go. Now, I'm not expecting her to do that off the top of her head, am I? I'm expecting her to be able to do that with her notes. Now, what I don't want her to do is to sit there and read each one of those sentences. What I ultimately want her to be able to do is to summarize all of that into a line or 2 or 3. So that now she's responding. Remember, we wrote it up here on the board orally, huh? Right? On the other hand, if I wanted her to write about it, I could. Why are we looking at these models? Because these are all examples of what? Writing profile. That's what this chapter is called, right? Writing profile. So that allows for us to be able to get a sense. That's what these model essays look like. Now I'm going to take an essay that maybe I already wrote on a significant person, and I'm going to ask, in what ways can I make that essay a little bit better by using some of the suggestions that I'm giving here through my models? Make sense? In other words, back to my example, let's try and be better basketball players. Okay? Over time, you will get better at this. Okay? Depending on what you read, too. If you're an engineering major, for example, guess what? You're going to read a lot of math books, aren't you? If you're a biology major, guess what? You're going to read a lot of science. If you're a nursing major, you're going to read a lot of biology, aren't you? Right? And that kind of when you have to write in those classes, you want to be able to try to write as well as you can for that biology prof, right? In 1010, we just kind of learn the basic form. Okay? Any of you ever learn music? All right? If you grew up in a house where you had to learn music, and in Garza had to learn music. Na 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 na. Na, 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 over and over and over. Any athlete knows the same. Basically, we call it scale work, don't we? It's painfully boring, isn't it? Like over and over, the same movements, the same repetition, right? And when you're young, you're like, dude, this is so painfully boring. Of course, over time, scale work develops into, right, compositional work, where ultimately you can actually perform in front of a group, and nerves, even though you've got them, you can still perform with some fluidity, right? Writing is the same way. You learn the scale work. Na, 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 na. You learn it. Okay? And the way you learn is through reading. Ultimately, you'll get to where you can begin to look at reading in different ways. Okay? So it's not just words on a page. In the lectures you're about to watch in Flow, you're going to listen to a guy from Iowa Writers Workshop. He's a gun. He's a major gun in the field of compositional theory. And he will draw heavily from models that he will, in fact, read out loud to you oftentimes, where he will say, this is a fine piece of writing, and let me explain to you why. So as you're taking these notes, you want to pay particular attention anytime he's referencing to give you some kind of examples from texts, from stories or whatever, to give you a sense of what makes good writing. Okay? Take out 3 blank sheets of paper, and we'll get ready to go to work now.